everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of Digital Law News. So this episode, podcast is brought to you by Digital Law and Anson Evaluate.
Sorry, I've got this going off at my end. The alarm is going to go off.
Sorry.
This conference will now be recorded.
Hiya everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of Digital Law News. So this podcast is brought to you by Digital Law and hosted by Anson Evaluate. So just a little background for those who don't know, Digital Law is a niche law firm based in the UK, and we specialise in things to do with data protection, cyber law, and all things to do with technology matters as well. So I'm just pass over to Peter before we get started, just to introduce himself.
Thank you, Laura. My name is Peter. I'm the Assistant Managing Director at Digital Law, and we've got a fairly full week of news articles we wanted to share with you. We end up making sure we're on top of everything from a law and technology perspective each week, and we basically use these podcasts as an opportunity to share a lot of the discussions that we have in our office with you, our audience. So I'll pass back to Laura to start taking us through.
Great, thanks, Peter. So the first story that we're going to be speaking about today is internet giants are profiting from web scams, and this is according to banks. So banks have accused internet giants of profiting from online fraud and demanded that the government take action in relation to this. So this is basically when fraudsters report, victims of fraud end up reporting fraud cases to the banks, and they say they might have seen this post on social media about it or something, and then the banks have been trying to work with the internet giants like Facebook and Google and things like that to try and get these posts and fraudulent posts basically taken offline, and they're just saying that there is no concerted effort to take these scam sites down. So it's basically they're not working together to try and reduce the scam, and they might be profiting from that because the websites are obviously being paid advertising, which obviously go back to Google and Facebook and etc. So they're just profiting from keeping these up for longer, when really it's just people losing out in the long run.
Indeed, it's a little bit of a frustrating story, this, because it shows we have a lot of people that contact us who are individual users of some of these platforms, from anything from Facebook to Apple to other social media platforms, and very often they will say, look, we've had problems, our account's been locked, or we've been a victim of fraud, a victim of crime, or they've had like a business page that's been deactivated. Various things can happen, and they'll come and say, oh, well, what can we do, from a legal perspective to get this back? And very often the answer is regrettably not an awful lot. And it's very frustrating, I think, for the individual user, who can sometimes be looking to a profile, or in particular to a business page, for a lot of their livelihood, or indeed during the course of the last year, a lot of their social interaction. It can be very, very frustrating. But I think the interesting thing with this story is that even government departments find it similarly difficult dealing with these corporations. They are just as obstructive and just as difficult to deal with at a government level as individual users find them to be. And in this instance, law enforcement is trying to say, look, you are to a certain extent perpetuating fraud, allowing fraudsters to get away with it. And in fact, you're finding that some of these large tech corporations are not helping when it comes to taking down potentially fraudulent sites, fraudulent posts, fraudulent material, signposting, and other evidential information that can sometimes serve to back up an ongoing fraud. And clearly, this report would appear to suggest that in a similar way to the way that, I would say, the individual users are treated, then governments, banks and law enforcement are getting the same treatment. Doesn't really make these tech companies, it doesn't help to really portray them in a very positive light. But I think at this point, after 15 to 20 years of their development, I think we're starting to see the common thread appearing there in terms of how they operate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this comes back to like the Digital Services Act and those type of acts that are coming into force that may help with issues like this in terms of trying to making them be responsible for some of the things. But like we said, that's not coming in anytime soon, or it might do, but we don't know what it looks like.
Indeed, and as you say, Laura, that's at a European level. What will happen in the UK? And I think we look to the UK Competition and Markets Authority to take a lead on this, really. But when they have so many things to now look at when it comes to the regulation of UK competition as a whole, we hope that they are able to strike a good balance between regulating these corporations, protecting the rights of individual users. And when we say users, it's important to remember that we are looking very often at corporations in themselves, albeit more at the SME sector, but corporations nonetheless. They also need their protecting to a certain extent. And, as can be seen here, we do not want these platforms to be perpetuating fraud. There is enough of that taking place, as we talk about every week, in terms of various different cyber attacks, without the fraud going unanswered on these platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on to our next story of today then. So this is in regards to Ofcom and the ICO and their report that they have published in relation to their plan for tackling nuisance calls. So the ICO leads in the UK on tackling live and recorded marketing calls, as well as nuisance texts, messages and emails, and is responsible for taking action against them. So we see a lot of ICO fines in relation to GDPR, and then under the PECA regulations as well in relation to marketing of this sort. And the Ofcom also lead in terms of silent and abandoned calls, and works with the ICO and telecom companies and other organisations to provide research and technical assistance, as well as advice to the public. So they have come together, like they do every year, and published a plan on tackling nuisance and scam calls for 21 and 22. So in the 2020 report, they have seen since that report that both complaints to the ICO and the Ofcom have reduced in terms of nuisance calls. So this plan basically goes into detail about what they suggest doing, the amount of nuisance calls they have, which is still quite high in relation to the things that are happening. So yeah, it just basically goes into their plans on tackling scams, the technical solutions, and the ICOs and Ofcom's overall plans for 21 in general.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, this is a crucial area of development. I think good to see that Ofcom and the ICO are both working together on this. As part of the overall increase in fraud that we've been seeing, that a large part of that has been through nuisance calls, fake scam calls. One of the things, of course, is in the course of the last year, more of us have been at home, so there's been more scope that home phone extensions will end up being picked up and answered, and fraud can be perpetuated. Anyone who's found themselves having a conversation with someone at a call centre purporting to be their bank, or someone else asking them to start going through personal data will know this very, very well. So the fact there is a clear concerted plan in place is encouraging, but I think we need to wait and see now what happens in terms of the results on that. Do they end up measurably actually having an impact on the growth of these calls and hopefully reducing the amount of fraud that they perpetuate?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a good story that we're leading on to next in terms of the specific scam that's going around in terms of the Royal Mail and the text messages that people are receiving in relation to the like packaging and the deliveries. So this is a text that a drama student actually received and ended up being defrauded of about £1,000, which was a complete account basically. So a drama student basically received this text, which she thought was from Royal Mail, asking her for a £2.99 additional postage free. So I think this is all in relation to the ongoing problems with the posting to do with Brexit. So she thought it was legit and put her bank details in. After she put her bank details in, she then got a call from Barclays Bank, so what she thought, and they said that somebody had tried to set up direct debits and take payments from her account. They then took her through to the security team and started cancelling all her cards, and then generated her a new account and a new sort code and account number, and asked her to transfer all her money into the account, which she then proceeded to do while she was still on the phone. And she even asked the man and said, like, how do I know that you're really who you say you are? How do I know you're my bank? And he gave her some information about like how much were in her bank accounts and things like that, forgetting that she actually told them that information at the beginning of the call. And they gave her the number that they was calling from, which was on the back of her card and was the bank's official number on the website. And she transferred all her money and then realised that it was a scam.
Indeed. I think this is a story that shows the importance of realising that this sort of fraud still takes place on a very regular basis.
Yeah.
I remember being asked to speak a few years ago at a conference, and they said, "Oh, can you sort of take us through main things with regards to cybersecurity?" And I was sort of talking about, well, we'll talk about nuisance calls and passwords and the important. And they went, "Oh, no, we don't need to cover that because everyone knows not to do that, don't they?" Well, you know, the fact that we've had stories, and we've covered this one this week, and then a few weeks back, listeners will recall that we talked about a cryptocurrency scam whereby a cryptocurrency investor lost £400,000 worth of Bitcoin through a fraudulent online promotion where they thought they were going to double their money, and of course turned out they lost their money. And it just kind of shows that, you know, this is a drama student who has successfully got into be able to study the art of drama, and the couple of the story with regards to cryptocurrency was someone who worked in the tech industry. So we're talking about people who are clearly very smart, but are still taken in by these sorts of scams. So presuming, oh, well, this will never happen to me and I would know what to do if you got that sort of call, doesn't necessarily protect us from that fraud being perpetuated nonetheless. To be honest, I think this tends to make you actually quite reticent about even answering phone calls from numbers that you don't trust. Yeah. And I think that is with good reason. Increasingly now, for example, on our phones, we are able to save key numbers, so you know who it is who's calling you half the time. And it gets to the point where if you're actually receiving a number that you don't recognize, I think very often it's actually worth just letting it ring out. And if it is important, they will leave a message. And if it is something important, you know, a really important communication from your bank or some other agency, well, if it's important, they'll leave a message and you can get back and verify whoever it is through your legitimate contact information, rather than necessarily trusting the contact information that someone has used in trying to get through to you on the phone. So I would be increasingly wary about actually answering calls from numbers that you don't recognize, and wary above that, acting on any of the information that you may give. In the same way that we always advise, if you receive an SMS message or an email with a link in it, we always say, well, don't log in using that, you know, don't click on that link. If you do have an account with your bank or whatever agency, use your trusted information to go back to them. For example, if someone says, here's a link so you can book a coronavirus vaccination, I'd always say, well, actually go and book it through the official COVID website or call your GP. I wouldn't end up clicking on the link, and I'd argue that we should be actually thinking of the same thing when it comes to phone calls like this as well. And as we say on this, it all started from a fake text. So again, do not follow those sort of fake texts if you can possibly help it. I seem to have received a couple of dozen of them even within the course of the last week. So it just really shows how prevalent these things are at the moment. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it's worth mentioning as well. I know when myself and a colleague did some research into like these types of calls a couple of years back, and we ended up doing some training on this, and we found that some of the actual people who are calling end up saying that they're calling from the number that actually is on back of your card, or is on the official website, and they have some type of technology that when you ring that number back, they can get back onto that conversation where they left off. And so it may be even be worth, if you do receive a call like that, try and ring in from a different phone just to be sure, because this is how they trick you out as well.
Exactly. It's a matter of paranoia can leave you actually not trusting anything you then receive. But to be honest, I don't think at the moment you can really be too careful. So I think you're quite right. And of course, there, Laura, you've talked about the wonderful training that you've delivered for our clients in the past there. Where you and your colleagues have gone into some of our clients, helped their admin teams who are dealing with phone calls, emails and communications every day, and helping them to identify the genuine from the not so genuine, with some really good anecdotes and quizzes and stories. And needless to say, that's something that you do for all of our clients, and we've been doing it online as well during the course of the last year. So we can certainly highly recommend that to any of our listeners who may be interested.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some information about that on our website as well, if anyone's interested. So moving on to the next story then. So this is in relation to a cyber attack. So Fatface, the retailer, actually had a cyber attack back in, I think it was January or February time. But they haven't basically said anything about this publicly until recently. So the cyber attack actually involved information about the customers, which they have spoken about publicly, which involves their names, their email addresses and physical addresses that have been put at risk. But it has also now been discovered that their employees' details were actually put at risk as well. And they were only told about this recently, rather than when the actual event occurred. And they failed to publicly disclose this when the news of the breach came to light. So I think this is just all about the reporting to the ICO, and obviously they might have not correctly followed the ICO's rules and the Rules of Data Protection Act in terms of reporting it to the ICO and also reporting it to the data subjects as soon as possible, and within that 72-hour window, to make sure that the effects of this is minimised as possible.
Indeed. I think this is a fascinating story. I mean, first of all, Fatface is a really large brand, I think. You know, they've got a lot of stores. I think in this article it referred to, I think, 1,000 stores around the country, as well as a significant online presence, of course, that's allowed them to continue and grow their business during the course of the last year. And we're talking here about a large volume of personal data. But there's almost echoes here of the problems that Morrison's got into a few years ago when details of their payroll was leaked, albeit by one of their own members of staff intentionally. Who ended up doing that. In this instance, it looks like that similar sort of payroll information has been leaked, and of course the key thing here is reporting it. And this actually reminds me of a problem that we had that one of our clients came to us with recently, whereby they were convinced that their platform that they use for their services, for their phones, had been compromised. And we said, well, if that is the case, and we identified the fact that if that was compromised, details related to all of their individual contacts and clients would have been at risk. We said, well, look, where it looks like there's been a breach, you as a data controller are under an obligation to report this within 72 hours of the date of knowledge. And from what you're telling us, and we're basically saying that clock begins to run from now. So you've now got 72 hours to go ahead and do this. But the provider of the platform, the data processor, was adamant, saying, oh, no breach, nothing at all. You're totally mistaken. And that really, you know, if our client had followed the processor's advice, they themselves could end up being in breach of GDPR for having not followed the reporting requirements. Just because you report something does not mean that you'll end up with an investigation and fine from the ICO, but it is important that you end up reporting within that 72 hours. And if anything, the approach of the ICO over the course of the last few years has been, if in doubt, report it. They would rather you report it and then find that either there hasn't been a breach or it's been limited and the damage to data subjects has been limited. They would much rather that you tell them at the outset, rather than actually finding out about a breach further down the line, say from affected data subjects, calling the data controller saying, have you had a breach? The controller says yes, to which the ICO then says, well, why didn't you tell us? You're now in breach of the regulations under the DPA 2018. So there's some quite important principles here. And I think it's quite important for organizations to remember that the laws that apply in terms of reporting under DPA 2018, they are obligations that apply. And even if you have subcontractors or control or processes that say, well, we're based in another country, we don't have to tell you, or we don't have to provide you with any additional information. Well, actually they do, because you're a UK-based or EU-based data controller. You have to comply with certain regulations under the Act, and you don't have a choice in that. So always seek independent third-party advice. Don't think that you can sort of wait or delay these things. That's what is done in certain other countries. Very often in America, there is no requirement to report unless you're a publicly traded company. So very often the default position is wait. Don't actually report it. Don't tell the affected data subjects. Certainly don't tell the press. Don't tell anyone else. While it is a very different position now in the UK and Europe. So just remember those reporting requirements if you think you may have had a breach.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key message here is even if you're in doubt about whether there is a breach, just report it anyway. The ICO are not going to just hit down and start fining people willy-nilly just because they think they might have had a breach without doing an extensive investigation into the company. So yeah, I think that's the most important bit. Always report, even if there is a doubt, the slightest little doubt that there is a breach, and that reporting itself could prevent you from getting a fine in the long run.
Exactly, Laura. It always comes down to demonstrating compliance. If you can show that you're doing all you can be reasonably expected to do, given the size of your organisation, given the volume of data you've got, what more can you do? So if you can just show you're doing your best and trying to comply with the spirit and meaning of the regulations, what more can you do? And in that scenario, best to report it, and then even if you can't give the regulator all the information that they need within 72 hours, you can at least start the ball rolling and then get back to them with as much information as you're able to find during the course of your own internal investigation as you identify exactly what's happened and what you're going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, exactly. So the next story kind of follows on from this in terms of data protection and cybersecurity. So this is just a new tool that's been released by the NCSC to test your cybersecurity risk, as a service that was previously carried out exposed that 80% of people fear online attacks. So this, like I mentioned, this is a new digital tool for individuals to receive advice on improving their cybersecurity. And this is from the NCSC. So it's basically a cyber action plan for individuals. And it's basically just a little simple survey that you carry out, which I think it takes about 3 to 5 minutes. And there's 2 different ones. There's one for individuals and families, and there's one for small businesses as well, so the SMEs. And it's basically just a 3 to 5 minute survey, and it asks you a few simple questions, like how is your data backed up and things like similar to that. Goes into things about passwords and two-factor authentication, and then you get basically a free personalised list of actions that you need to take or you're recommended to take to help you improve your cybersecurity. So I think for people who are concerned about the online cybersecurity and those businesses who don't really know where to start and may have like very small budgets in terms of things like this, it's a good tool just as a starting place, and then can always go on to get outside help if necessary.
Thanks, Laura. I think this is another great example of the brilliant work that the NCSC is doing. I had a call from a tech journalist earlier today who wanted to talk about smart contracts and AI, and the issue of security and cybersecurity in the NCSC came up, and I was amazed when he said, "Sorry, what's the NCSC?" And I was like, Wow, okay. But it just reminded me that not necessarily everyone knows it exists. And when we say the NCSC, of course, we mean the National Cyber Security Centre, the UK government agency charged with making the UK the best place in the world to do business online. It is in effect the civilian arm of GCHQ, the government military communications listening post. They have very nice offices in Victoria, in London. They have departments within it focused on different parts of the economy. So there's advisors there who look at everything from legal services to financial services to the medical profession. And they are putting together really helpful practical tools to help businesses. In the past, we've talked about they have something called Exercise in a Box, which is a sort of tool whereby a board can sit down and do an analysis to sort of show, right, what would you do if the worst happened? What would you do in the event there was a breach? What would your response be? And in this instance, this is another of the new tools that they have put together. And it's important to remember that it doesn't cost anything to do it. It's already paid for. I'm afraid it's paid for through your taxes. So it's there, it's free to use. And these NCSC tools are designed for everyone. You do not have to be a specialist to go on there and use it. It's written in clear, plain English. It's not difficult, it's not complex to use, but they are usually designed to be able to, as I say, be easy to use, but deliver practical, demonstrable results in terms of knowledge on the back of it. So I can highly recommend taking a look and using this tool and the other free tools that are available there from the NCSC. I think it's ncsc.gov.uk is the website.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I've just checked on my notes here. Yeah, so yeah, everything on there is really good in terms of it's always in plain language, and it is designed to help those who literally don't have a clue about online cybersecurity to those who do have more knowledge about it. So I think it is helpful for people of all knowledge and all businesses as well, no matter the size. But yeah, I think a lot of the advice is targeted to the smaller businesses that may have like the limited budget in terms of this. But yeah.
Exactly, and I think for those whose only experience of government websites might be, with regards to security, might be the ICO website, which is still a little bit difficult to navigate, I think, albeit the content on there is really good. I think the NCSC one is a step above that, nice and clear, some really good helpful reports on there, some good statistics. I'd certainly always recommend taking a look at the NCSC's annual report. Their 2020 report was fascinating. I'm looking forward to the 2021 report that will take account of patterns, of course, during the course of the pandemic, during the course of the last year. But yeah, as I say, all those free tools you've already paid for, so may as well go ahead and use them.
Great. So that was our last story for today. So we just want to remind everyone about the special offer we have on for our listeners. So this is our GDPR compliance manual for legal practices. So this was drafted in collaboration with Anson Evaluate and BMS as well. So this was originally £195 and it is now down to £99. So around 50% off. It's available in hard copy and digital copy as well. So I'll just pass over to Peter just to give you some information about that.
Thank you, Laura. Yes, the GDPR toolkit, the guide's so good that we continue to use it on a regular basis. So I've actually got a copy of it in front of me here. It's not showing up on the camera, unfortunately, but it's got everything from chapters on social media to password security to insurance to training to office infrastructure, HR, payroll, all of the areas that you need to get a grip on when it comes to your data protection compliance. GDPR is very good at telling you the standard you need to get to. It doesn't tell you how to do it. This manual does, with the shape of forms and templates and checklists to give you practical help on getting there. And that's been put together by our friends and colleagues at Anson Evaluate. So we've got the promotion there, and I should also say we're also working on an online GDPR course as well, which is going to be coming up online shortly. But if you'd like to register your interest in that online course, then do as well get in touch with us, and you can be within the first wave of people to be involved with being able to take a look at that when it is available. So please do register your interest for that.
Thanks, Peter. And yeah, just a little reminder as well about some of the things Anson Evaluate do. So they provide training, webinars and consultancy services. So all over the pandemic, especially in the first wave last year, Anson Evaluate hosted a lot of webinars for different businesses, and with loads of different businesses collaborating with those about training, things to do with HR, cybersecurity, etc. So if you are wanting any training services provided, or you're wanting to start some webinars and struggling to get that set up, just drop Anson Evaluate an email at either of the two email addresses on the screen, and they'll be able to help you with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Anson Evaluate's training and consultancy around things like data protection, cybersecurity is absolutely first class, and digital law, we work very closely with them on a number of aspects, and can highly recommend them, particularly for the online training that they put together. I've just talked about the GDPR training, but also they do various other webinars, and indeed can help your organisation with producing your own in-house webinars and training packages as well. So please do feel free to get in contact using the information there. It's ansonevaluate.com or admin@ansonevaluate.com.
Great, thanks, Peter. So that's everything we've got time for today. So just a reminder for everyone, these are weekly webinars and podcasts that usually get released on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. So they are available to view through our website, through our YouTube channel, or on podcast channels as well, so Spotify and Apple and everything. So that's everything we've got time today, and we will hopefully see you next week for another episode. Thank you, everyone.